Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon.
May I ask one question, but it was from previous presentations about ligaments and uh, what was
Tendons.
cartilage? Yeah, ligaments and cartilage. What is
Cartilage.
the
Okay.
difference between these two?
So we have the ligaments. They usually, so let's say this is bone 1 and this is bone 2. So this surface here, it is usually the cartilage. And it is to reduce the friction between the two bones. And we also have the system that connects them like this, creating the capsule of the joint, okay? So these filaments, they are ligaments. So they connect bone to bone. And the cartilage, again, it is about the surfaces of the bones. Also, where we have the cartilages, it's, for example, our nose. So you know that our nose looks something like this. And here we could have the system, not the system, but the numerous cartilages that create this form. So it's not the bone, it is the softer tissue that can bend, so it is more flexible than the bone because it is not calcinated. So these cartilages, it also creates the inter the septum inside our nose, and it is quite huge. Again, the ligaments, they are connecting bone to bone, and usually it's the um, capsule of the bone or capsule of the joint, sorry. While cartilages, they are for the surface of the bones that face each other to reduce the friction, so reduction of friction, or create the carcass for flexible parts like ear or nose, etc. For the tendons, so let's say we have the muscle, and we need to connect it to the bone. And let's say this is a bone. And we need to connect it with something that will be uh, much, much more rigid than the muscle itself, but also not as rigid as the bone. So it can bend and we can stretch it a little, etc. So what we do, we connect these muscles to special connective tissues, connective filaments. And then these filaments, they attach to the bone. So they have some kind of anchor. And the role of these tendons is to anchor the muscle to bone.
Okay, I had another question on this topic of bone and skeletal system. Is it okay if I ask?
Yes, yes, for sure.
So I was like reviewing my material, and I'm not sure how lamellars they're a part of osteons, but I'm not sure how they're
So what is the connection
they
between
go in the
lamella and
structure of.
osteon?
Yeah, they're in the osteons, but I'm not sure how they are located
Yeah,
in the structure of
great.
osteons.
So let's say we have one osteon and it looks like the cylinder, and we have the central part, which is the canal, and it is the place for arteries and veins, also for nervous system. So we have vessels here, and this is the central part, okay? So then we have the smaller things like, how to say that? Just imagine how the tree grows. So it has these medulla, and then it has some layers, and these layers are created with the aging of this tree, right? Just assume these lamella to be these rings of the tree. So it just grows like this, the same way in the osteon, and the plates or planes of these costal tissues, they are created by osteocytes or osteoblasts. So these guys, they are osteoblasts, and they kind of create and secrete these tissues, so calcinated bone structures, and the newly secreted ones, they kind of push the older ones, and this would be the lamella. Okay, so I guess it's all about why we need these lamella, etc. And of course, because they are quite rigid and firm, they give this firmness to the bone itself. So that's why in compact bone tissue, which is on the outer side of the bone, so here it is hollow, and this is the compact bone tissue, and the strength of this compact tissue is related to these osteons and the lamella that are produced by the osteoblasts. And of course, these osteons, they are cylinders and they go like in the whole structure of the bone. So we have several osteons, and each osteon has the central part and all these kind of layers, tree-like layers.
Hello.
Hello, Tamaris.
Can I ask about the process of the occurrence of the pressure in our lungs?
Okay.
So, how the process is going? You in the lecture you said about the negative pressure and uh, the positive pressure in the lungs.
Yes. So, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we have our chest cavity, and again, these are ribs, and we have our lungs here. But also these lungs, they are inside the pleural covering. So on top of the lung, we have the lining of it is called pleura, and it creates a kind of cavity between the two foils of these pleura. So we have inner part and outer part of the pleura, and inside we have the intrapleural, or it is also called sorry, not intra, it is inter.
Interpleural.
Yes, and we also call it intrathoracic pressure. So inside this bag of pleura, it is always, the pressure is always lower than the atmospheric pressure. So we have pleural, and it is always smaller than atmospheric. But whenever our diaphragm starts moving, so the usual condition for our diaphragm is like this. So it contracts, and when contracting, it kind of moves down, okay? So instead of this usual view, it will look like this. right? And because the diaphragm is connected to the bottom side of the pleura, it kind of pulls the whole back on it and increases, not increases, but decreases the intrapleural pressure. So in this case, it becomes much more lower than the atmospheric one. So whenever we have the high, like very low pressure inside something, everything else tries to get inside. So this difference in the pressure, so the difference between interpleural and atmospheric, it will move the air, and the air will go from the outside inside our lungs, and it will expand all the alveoli, etc. Okay. So because we have smaller pressure here, so what happens next? Next we have the relaxation of the diaphragm, and it moves back to its normal place. And whenever it moves back, so the interpleural pressure, it gets back to the first state, and now it's a little less than the atmospheric pressure. So what happens with our lungs? So these alveoli, so they are expanded with the air inside. And because the wall of the alveoli, it is elastic, it kind of, because it doesn't have this kind of support from this very small interpleural pressure, it will try to squeeze itself, because at the moment of relaxation of diaphragm, the pressure inside the alveoli, so pressure inside alveoli, is more than the atmospheric one. And because we have the difference between these pressures, the air will start leaving. So we exhale, and it is related to the elasticity of this wall, okay?
So first, initially, our pressure of pleura is less than the atmospheric pressure, but when our diaphragm moves, it lowers down, and the pressure of pleura becomes much more less than the atmospheric pressure.
Yes, you're right. And this works as the syringe. So you all know the syringe. So we have, the initial pressure here, and whenever we remove this thingy here, so we move it down, we expand, or we increase the volume, and because we have the same amount of substance inside bigger volume, the pressure drops down, right? And because it drops down, we have the difference between the outsides and the initial pressure. So the outside is bigger than the initial one. And in this case, it will suck either air or the substances that we want to suck, right? And the same happens here, but only with air. That's why actually people, whenever they fall into water, they can suffocate, because instead of air on the contraction of the diaphragm, the water gets inside. Okay.
And can I ask one more question? But it is more not a question, but more like your opinion. Okay, so we know that smoking can harm the lungs and even cause the cancer of lungs. But today there's an alternatives to the cigarettes, And is it possible that this um, alternative cigarettes can harm less than the actual cigarettes?
Yeah, I see what you mean. So the problem here is that it is not an alternative. The only alternative to smoking is not smoking, right? So whenever you have something to replace the cigarette, it's still smoking. And the problem with it, we reduce the number of chemicals that we inhale with the smoke. But the problem where we just reduce the number of these chemicals. Mm, you drink 5 poisons, and all of a sudden you decide to drink 3 poisons, not 5. Is it alternative to the first condition? No, it's not. It's just the reduction of the number of poisons. So we will never be able to replace the cigarette smoking with something not harmful. Even if you try to inhale the usual smoke from the woods, etc., so you burn wood and inhale it. First of all, you have the difference in temperature. So your nose cavity and all these paranasal sinuses, they will not be able to reduce the temperature of the inhaled air or inhaled smoke, and it will already harm your lungs, etc. Okay, so even usual smoke is harmful for yourself. We have another question from Ayan, and this is about the how food can drop from esophagus to trachea and consequences of such accident. We also have a question from Dana. So the problem with the esophagus, so let's say this is your palatinum, here you have your tongue, and here is the esophagus. Here you have your larynx, and here we have the epiglottis. So what happens when we try to swallow the food? Usually the tongue pushes the epiglottis, so it moves down, and in this case, it closes the entrance to the larynx, and the food just gets in a single proper way, so it goes to the esophagus. So what might happen whenever the food gets inside the larynx? It is called aspiration. So in this particular case, it's food aspiration. And how it might happen because we try to both swallow the food and we try to inhale air. So in this case, because air is much more important for our body, we send the signal to our brain to open the entrance of the larynx so that we can inhale. And of course, parts of the food will also get inside. And it is the very dangerous case. Why it's dangerous? Because here in larynx, it can easily block. So somewhere somewhere behind the thyroid cartilage, we have our folds, and they look like this. So we have two cartilages, so 1 and 2, and the vocal folds between them. So these vocal folds, they are usually enough to give the space for air, because air is gaseous. But whenever something gets here, even small parts of the food, they can obstruct it. So in this way, and because of the innervation of the folds, they can just close. Okay, so it's the reflectory mechanism. So instead of opened folds, which still can pass the air, we actually have the folds that close totally. And no air passes. So in this case, we start suffocating. And it is the hypoxic condition, etc., etc. But something worse might happen. So the particles of food, they can go through these folds and get to trachea and bronchi. And actually in the trachea and bronchi, so we have trachea here and bronchi like this. So let's say the particles, they are in the diameter of these guys. So they, again, they block the passage of the air, and it usually just leads to the suffocation again. The good thing is about the blockage of single bronchi, because the other part can still survive with the, not the other part, but human can survive with only one lung. But if everything is blocked, it's quite dangerous. By the way, so whenever we have the blockage on the site of vocal folds, we can cough and it will get out. From this part, whenever we block bronchi and trachea, coughing might not help, and it even might, how to say that, push the particles of the food even further to our bronchi and trachea. How it happens? Because for coughing, we need the volume of air. So we need to inhale the volume of air and then cough. And in this way, the air from the outside pushes this food further inside the tubes, okay? And what else might happen? So the innervation of our trachea and bronchi is quite rich, and sometimes it can cause the I guess it's called aorta pulmonary reflex, and this reflex, it stops the heart from beating. So whenever something gets inside the trachea and bronchi, the receptors, they are being excited, and they cause this aorta pulmonary reflex. And this activation of this reflex leads to the stop of the conduction system. So we have our heart. So somewhere here we have this pacemaker. So this reflex, it sends the signal to stop. And at that moment, we have the situation very close to heart attack, because we cannot just we cannot pump the blood, right? So it's quite dangerous. So I guess these are all, yes, I guess it's all cases when the particles of food gets in. We also have the particles, not particles, but volumes of water that get inside. And oh, by the way, so the epiglottis, since it is bound to our tongue, so whenever we extend this place, so whenever we, for example, eat in the position like this, the tongue, it moves forward and pulls these epiglottis too. So whenever you eat or drink in this position, your epiglottis does not close the larynx fully. So we have a small hole here, and the food or water can get inside the larynx. So do not extend your neck whenever you eat or drink. So now let's talk about the getting of water inside our lungs. So I hope you all understood this picture, because I'm going to delete it. Let's say that we have water that gets into our lungs. And we have, so this water, because it's liquidous, it does not block the tubes like trachea and bronchi. It gets straight to alveoli, and whenever it gets to alveoli, so just imagine this alveolar sac, and we have the lining of epithelial tissue. We also have the surfactant on top of this epithelial tissue, and this surfactant, it is a little hydrophobic. Well, it actually has both hydrophobic and hydrophilic parts. Sorry, but usually outside, or this part is hydrophobic. So whenever we have water inside, it does not mix with the surfactant, and it blocks the passage of air. So let's say that air gets in, and because of huge distance between this point and this point, it cannot go through and give this oxygen to the blood. So we cannot do that because of water. And if it is the non-salty water, it is better because the osmotic pressure will push this water inside the blood, because here we have oncotic and osmotic pressure. And because of these two types of pressures, the water will get into blood. And in this case, it will free the alveolar sac, but we really need to have very small amounts of water here. So if we have a lot of water, the alveolar sacs, they will be blocked, and we will not be able to get all this water inside our blood, and we die of hypoxia more faster than we get rid of this water here. So also we can have salty water here, and it is much worse, because if we have salty here, the osmotic pressure of this salty water is much bigger or larger than the osmotic pressure of the blood. So osmotic and the osmotic of the blood. And sometimes it's much more. The pressure is much larger. And in this case, it will suck water from the blood and will never the alveolar sac will never be freed from this water. And in this case, so whenever the salty suffocation happens, it's much worse.
How many minutes with food and I guess water too a person have before before getting some medical help, or how many minutes before he dies exactly?
So the problem here is with the brain. Our muscles, they can survive for hours because we don't have oxygen, and they can go to the anaerobic production of energy. What really is dangerous is our heart and brain, because if they don't have enough oxygen, they die very fast. And I guess it's 5 to 10 minutes of healthy resuscitation. So we can reanimate person in 5 to 10 minutes and nothing happens to them. But if it is more than 10 minutes, let's say 30 minutes, we should expect some damage of the heart or of the brain. And just imagine the person that lived through the stroke. So it will be almost the same condition for the person who lived through this suffocation.
And is there something an ordinary human can do to prevent, not to prevent, but I don't know,
Yeah,
offer some medical help if the
help.
food is in the lung or?
Yeah, so if the food is in the lung, we can, you kind of hug the person from the back, and you push like below the diaphragm. So you kind of squeeze the person so that the air that is inside. So let's say we have the blockage of the trachea or bronchi, and we have the diaphragm here, and the person who helps, just a second. So the person that helps, so they put their hands here and squeeze the person that needs the help. And in this case, everything that is inside, so let's say that they had some air inside. Whenever we push, we kind of create this diaphragm relaxation-like gesture, and it will push all the air outside. And in this case, it will help to remove the food particles. It might not help, but it is at least the chance to save the person, right? What else we could do? I guess is the only thing. We could also get the person upside down. So let's say that these are the legs. So the person head here, and the arms are here, so hands here. So we kind of keep the person like this and try to hit on the back so that the gravity, so just imagine this picture upside down. So the gravity will work on these particles of the food in this direction, so down. And whenever we create the quakes or hit the person, the smaller the food particles that are in smaller tubes, they will also kind of tremor too. And at this moment, they will go in the direction of bigger diameter tubes, okay? I guess the same practice is for water suffocation. So because of the gravity, the water will start moving towards the head and will leave the lungs. So the water, because it's liquidous. Okay, so about the voice production or sound production. Okay, so we have the voice folds, and they work like strings. So you have the guitar and your strings, they are fixed between 2 points, right? Okay, nice, Medina. So you have these strings, and let's say that you hit on one of the strings, and it starts vibrating. And by vibrating, it creates this sound wave. And the same happens here. So we have these vocal folds that are fixed between two cartilages. So 1 and 2. And whenever we pass air through that, so imagine them in the, I guess it's X, right? So this is from top, and this is anterior view, or from the front. So these are the same as here, and let your air pass through these vocal folds. So in this case, because of the movement of the air, these folds, they will start vibrating, as well as the string vibrates. And by vibrating, they create the sounds. So the sound waves. And if we have physicists here, they will probably explain it in more details and better than I do, but it is how, like in easy words. So whenever we create these waves, we can manipulate the amplitude. So this distance here, and we manipulate it by the velocity of this air stream. So the higher the velocity, the higher the amplitude. And if we start moving the cartilages, so let's say this is the D2 and this is D1. So if we increase the D2, so this is the distance between the cartilages, because we have the fixation of the folds here, the distance here, so it's D3, D3 will be smaller than the initial one, because we start moving to increase the D2. And in this case, what we do, we actually change these lengths, it's not lengths or wavelengths, right? So it is lengths. So we change the length of the wave. And whenever we change the lengths, we have different characteristics. So let's say that we reduce the length. So now the wave looks like this. And this would be assumed to be a high voice. So again, it's about tenor or people who can sing on very high notes, etc. And if we instead reduce the D2, so we have like this, so it's cartilage 2 and cartilage 1, our folds will be like this. So we increase the D3. And whenever we increase these D3, our sound wave will look like this. So we also increase these lengths. And this will be low voice. And it is about people who sing bass, you know, their voice is assumed to be bass, and it is very low one. So this is how we create the sound waves, and we can manipulate these sound waves further in our mouth using the lips, the teeth, the tongue, and by increasing the cavity of our mouth. So it's like the volume inside our mouth. Whenever we increase it, we further increase the lengths, the wavelengths, etc., etc. What are the bronchi? Where is their location, and what are the functions? Bronchi is the plural of bronchus. So the bronchus is the division of the trachea. So we have trachea here, and it divides into two bronchus. So left and right primary bronchus. So if we talk about two bronchus, we say that it is two bronchi. And I explained their location, I explained their functions in the lecture. What is the main function is to pass the air, so it can get from the trachea to the next set of bronchi. at some point the bronchi become too small and they become the bronchioles. Bronchioles.
Excuse me, may I clarify something about the suffocation?
Yes, for sure.
Is it going to work the same way with infants or children?
Could you repeat your question, please?
Is it going to work the same way? I mean, is the lung developed the same way in infants or newborn childs or younger children?
So I guess I didn't get the first part of the question. So this question is, I mean, what is working the same way in infants, etc.? I didn't get
The
the
suffocation.
first part.
The suffocation.
Suffocation, yes, it's almost the same, but the good thing is that infants and children of, well, the youngest children, so they have the larynx. So again, let's say this is palatinum. So you have your tongue here and epiglottis here, and so esophagus and larynx. So this is larynx and this is esophagus. So this is for the adult people or children who are older than, I guess, 3 or 5 years. So we need this epiglottis to move down. But for newborns, so it's like days after the birth, the larynx is actually located, well, it's not totally like this, but just imagine that the tube goes much higher than it is in adults. So as you understand, their neck is much smaller than ours. So whenever we grow, this tube is kind of going down, but it's not technically going down. We just grow all the tissues up, and in the end, it will be like in adults. But for the newborns, it's like this, and they can actually both drink the milk and inhale the air. Okay, so let's say the milk goes from the mouth and it kind of surrounds the tube, okay, and gets into these esophagus. But it doesn't mean that the child cannot suffocate, because still, if the child is being held in this position, so this is head, and here we have this larynx. If we try to feed the child while they are lying, so the milk will easily get inside and then into the lungs. So the good position for feeding is always keeping them straight, so in this direction, so that the gravity makes this work of redirection the milk. Okay, I guess
Okay.
that's all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.